Jesus says, "But in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens." Okay, so let's walk through this very slowly. First of all, he says, in those days following that distress. So what is the distress? It's the siege of Jerusalem, right? We talked about it last time. 1.1 million people died in the siege of Jerusalem. So he says, following that distress, after the siege of Jerusalem, what is going to happen? The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. So if you're a skeptic of the Bible, this is maybe a go-to section where you'd say, Christians believe that the sun just stopped shining for a while and that the moon stopped shining too? You guys are ridiculous. Don't you know science? First of all, I would drive them back to the point where Jesus was on the cross and the sun actually did stop shining, and we have Romans who said there was not supposed to be a solar eclipse on that day, but there was. So I would first of all say it's possible, but then I would actually say that's not what this text is even talking about. So if you go back and read the Old Testament, you'd realize that this language is indicative of the fall of a nation. The fall of a nation. We actually have multiple examples of this in the Old Testament. I'm not going to read them all to you, but you can go back and watch this later maybe and look these up yourself. But we hear the fall of Babylon, the fall of Egypt, the fall of Edom, and even the exile of Israel into Babylonian captivity described in terms of the sun turning off and the moon no longer giving its light. And I think maybe you can intuit a little bit why that would be the case. The fall of a nation at any time in the world's history is a cataclysmic event. It just changes the way of life for thousands, millions of people. It's almost as if it was as significant as if the sun just stopped shining, right? Life as it was is no longer new. The new normal, if you want to call it that, is the way that it is now. So when Jesus says the sun will turn to darkness and the moon will no longer give its light, he's talking about the fall of a nation. Specifically, the fall of the nation of Israel. Right, following that distress, after the siege of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, the nation of Israel will cease to exist. And here's what he means by that. God had connected his promises to one nationality throughout the whole Old Testament. But when Jesus came and did everything that Israel could not do in Israel's place, perfectly fulfilling the law in every place, and then died, gave his church that righteousness and rose again, he fulfilled that covenant. And then as Paul says in multiple places in Romans, being Israel is no longer connected to your biological lineage, but to your faith. So what Jesus is saying is that the nationality of Israel as God's people ends right here. But those who are the true Israel are those who are not from the biological lineage of Abraham, but those who have the faith of Abraham. Which means you can understand yourself or me to be Israel. In fact, when you read the Psalms and you read about Israel, you can input yourself into that because that's for you. You are Israel in a New Testament understanding of this. If you need more proof, just go to Peter's Pentecost sermon. At Pentecost, Peter stands up before the Jews and he preaches this exact same message, right? The sun will turn to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and powerful day of the Lord. And in that sermon, he is coming after this idea that the old covenant has ended and there is a new covenant in place where everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved.